I mean, I guess the last thing I want to say about this is that, like, certainly over the last couple days, like, if you are, in the West, you have been entreated to share how outraged your conscience is by all this violence, particularly in light of the fact that for the first time ever, the death toll is lopsided in the Israeli direction. But I guess I would just ask, like, for people who are horrified by all of this, like, what avenues towards non-armed conflict are left to the people of Gaza or any Palestinian at this point? Because I mean, like, it just like all legal political avenues, like, and even if you go back like to like previous iterations of Palestinian resistance, like the deals made by the PLO to like seek a two-state solution. All Israel had to do was stop its occupation and stop its annexation of territories. They have not done that for even a second over the last 30 or 40 years. And they've done it with the complete approval of the American government and every government in the EU, minus maybe Ireland. So like what like for the people who demand like nonviolence, like what would you do? Like what is left? And if you'd like a nonviolent solution, what can be done to to make that possible?
I mean, the main criticism and the main kind of fault line between Hamas and other groups who fight Israel and between the Palestinian Authority, which is kind of the accepted Palestinian representative to the West, to the Gulf states, etc., is that the Palestinian Authority conceded a lot to Israel, right? They conceded that the lands that Palestinians were forced out of in 1948, that should remain Israel. And all they asked for in return was self-government or rule in the occupied West Bank and Gaza, and that Israel remove the settlements from there. Instead, since that deal, the number of Israeli settlers has quadrupled. The annexation of the West Bank has become kind of like there's de facto annexation. And even kind of like the feeble attempts at reaching out to whatever's left of international institutions to hold Israel accountable are met with this crazed kind of screeching. Like when the Palestinian Authority tried to apply to become a member of the International Criminal Court to potentially bring charges against Israel for war crimes, it was denounced as diplomatic terrorism. How can terrorism be diplomatic, right? Words like lawfare, there's diplomatic terrorism, there's lawfare, there's if you want to boycott, then it's economic terrorism. If you march, then it's walking terrorism. I don't know. In 2018, in Gaza, for an entire year, right? The Great March of Return. Yeah, every Friday.
And they were unarmed. What happened to them?
Every Friday, people would go in their thousands, in their tens of thousands. They'd march to the eastern boundary. There'd be plays, there'd be dancing, music, cookouts. Families would gather. There'd be, political speeches, and people would try to get closer and closer to the fence. Because remember, for most people in Gaza, that land across the fence isn't a foreign land to them. It's where a lot of them came from, right? A lot of people in Gaza are refugees or the descendants of refugees who were forced out from the surrounding areas by Israeli forces and never have been allowed to return. So to them, that's their land, right? And for a year, they would march to the border or to the fence. And do you know what happened? Every single week, Israeli snipers stationed at the fence would shoot. So many people were shot in the knees that it kind of produced the phenomenon of an entire generation of amputees walking around Gaza on crutches. There was a famous headline by the Israeli newspaper Haaretz that had a quote from an Israeli sniper who said, "I took 42 knees in one day." Those were just
Christ.
Yeah, those were just the amputations. Hundreds of people were killed. Tens of thousands were injured. Medics were attacked, including famously a young volunteer medic called Razan Najjar, who was shot as she was walking with her hands up with her medic's uniform to reach a man who'd been injured closer to the fence. And what was the result of that? And by the way, some of this was covered quite extensively in the international press. But what was the global response? Week after week for an entire year, what pressure did it result in on Israel to end the siege, to allow these people to live? There was none. And I think people who advocate for nonviolence, I mean, it would be lovely. It would be amazing if no one had to die and no one had to fight for this thing to be resolved. But that's not what happens, unfortunately.
The thing that I have found particularly maddening has been people who have said, well, good luck now. You've alienated me from your cause. You've
Yeah.
alienated everyone from your cause.
Yeah.
What were you in America going to do? The people who I've seen said this are like Dan Carlin, the pop history podcaster. Were you going to make a podcast so good that it was going to result in a two-state solution? What, like, even if there was widespread Western sympathy, where did that bring us?
Yeah, I think one thing. The last time we spoke, you mentioned something along the lines. Felix, I think it was you who said that. I think you think the Palestinian cause is just going to eventually become one more thing that liberals talk about without doing anything about. And I remember thinking in the back of my mind, if that happens, then a lot of people will be self-congratulated, will congratulate themselves on showing the world that Palestinians are actual humans. But my family in Gaza are still going to be under siege. No one's going to stop that. And I think Hamas, when they decided to undertake this attack, and I think they are not stupid. They understand the value of kind of like how you're seeing public perception in the West. But I think they decided that it means nothing anymore, and
Yeah.
people are too desperate.
Yeah.
And I think and if the reports about hundreds of civilians being killed in addition to what seemed like hundreds of soldiers as well, including high-ranking officers killed, as that becomes confirmed, I think it's clear that Hamas decided to do that. There's a psychological element here, right? And I think Hamas decided that we need to change the rules of the game,
Yeah.
because this Western sympathy is not getting us anything. Celebrities tweeting about free Palestine is not freeing Palestine.
Yeah. I think a lot of the negative response you see to just even the concept of armed resistance is that if the end goal of this isn't the ideal of like a liberal Zionist or even like a self-professed American pacifist, where it's Israel keeps existing as it does, and there is like an impoverished Palestinian rump state that gets to have a president now.
Yeah.
It would be the end of Israel as we know it. It would be the end of Israel as an ethno-state project if they're successful here.
I mean, just to jump in, one thing that I really want to emphasize, because I feel this is getting lost. This is an apartheid state, right?
Yes.
Like this is not this. It's now become kind of accepted international human rights or the community that Israel is practicing apartheid. It's become accepted amongst a lot of elected officials in the West as well, right? But they're still standing up for Israel's right to do what it's doing in Gaza. They're still not putting any kind of pressure on it to end the occupation or even end the apartheid regime. So how far is Western sympathy really going to take us?
And Mohammed, another fact that in whether you want to just state Israel as an apartheid state, whether you're allowed to in the media, which you're certainly not for the most part, but the fact that gets lost in all of this is that Palestinians are the majority population of the within the borders that Israel controls. Palestinians are the majority population, and there is no way that you can dispossess them, the majority population, of not just their political and civil rights, but their homes and lives, without engaging in genocide of some kind. Which is, I mean, I think what we're seeing now.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, what's interesting to me, just watching kind of the U.S. media reaction to this, is contrasting it with what I've seen from the Israeli media, and I haven't watched enough Israeli media to make a major claim here, but we're seeing at least voices in the Israeli media that you'd never see in the American media, right? We got an editorial in Haaretz where the headline is Israel can't imprison 2 million Gazans without paying a cruel price. Israelis know this, right? Israelis just simply decided that the price was low enough that they were willing to pay it. Does this change things? We'll see. But it definitely does, completely upend the calculus that was governing the area before that.
Yeah, I have been curious to see. I mean, if Israel decides that is a price that they want to pay now and in the future, and maybe if they decide to even kill the hostages, I'm curious to see if Israel rips itself apart, or comes together as America after 9/11, or
Yeah.
Germany in 1937.
Yeah, I think one for Israel, I think one of the downsides of having repeatedly bombed Israel to the Stone Age, as the former Israeli Defense Minister Benny Gantz has said, who's kind of hailed as a liberal in America as well, is that there's not much more that you can do, right? So what we're seeing now is what we've seen in the past, but just on a greater scale. But the result is the same. They're not degrading Hamas's ability to fight. I mean, Hamas today launched several hundred rockets from underground rocket silos that it has in Gaza. The Israelis have not been able to stop that from happening. And what is going to happen eventually, I think, whether there's a limited ground incursion, whether there is a partial reoccupation, whatever, at the end of the day, Hamas is still going to be there. And this time, it's going to have several dozen or several hundred hostages with it that the Israelis are going to have to negotiate over, right?
Yeah.
And one way or another, there's going to be massive pressure from the Israeli public to fix that situation. So we'll see where that goes.